We're talking carriers.
Yeah.
Today. Not brokers.
No, broker marketing.
Brokers are an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not the puzzle that we're working on today.
Yeah.
Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com, episode 83. Who do we have?
Jen Pugsley.
Michael Turksani. We gave Harsh a second to flip the camera when you did your intro, or when you said your name. Jennifer Pugsley.
Yes.
Jennifer Elaine Pugsley. Oops, we're not supposed to use full names. Can we bleep that out? We don't need to.
We don't need to use
Everybody
middle names.
knows who she is in the insurance industry.
Maybe.
Yeah, everybody does. So if you don't know, that's probably an issue, right? And we're visiting the Toronto office this week.
Mm-hmm. Been good success.
Couple meetings.
Yeah. A couple meetings focused on broker marketing largely.
Broker marketing?
As in carriers marketing better to their brokers. Not broker marketing.
Carriers and
to
MGAs.
The consumer. Yeah. Yeah.
Carriers and MGAs.
Mm-hmm.
Insurance providers, insurance companies.
Yes.
So that's cool.
Yeah, it's been a really good trip. I think that a lot of good focus points for 2023, largely around broker personas and acquiring accurate broker data, keeping it fresh all the time, rounding out your brokerage accounts with data was a huge topic this week.
So we have broker customers, right?
Yeah, we have
Yeah,
broker
we have
customers.
broker customers, but today we're talking about the carrier marketing support that we do, right?
Yeah, carriers and MGAs, so
Yeah,
same
carriers
audience.
and same audience. Largely, marketing to their broker network, their broker partners, right?
The people that sell their business, not the direct channels.
Yeah, so a brokerage would have multiple carrier markets that they sell, or that they're able to place business with. And all of them are being kind of communicated to by these insurance markets.
Yeah.
So we help them run better programs. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean? Yeah, careful, you're going to get...
Yeah, so better programs through several different digital mediums, email being a strong one, always has been a strong one in the industry. But how you run email effectively to stay top of mind with a broker, right? And then all the things that go into top of mind for a broker. So something very simple like, tactics to actually land in the inbox, to being highly relevant, getting your messages read, education, new business, retention, advertising for new product lines. So not just email, right? So then there's also the other pronged approach with social media. So really broker comms, effective, smart broker comms when your brokers are getting 30 other comms every week from their other carriers. So, so we've seen big strides, I think, in the industry, but there's still such a gap around the technology and a gap of knowledge, right? So simple things like deliverability and all the things that go into, the back end stuff to running good email. Then all the front end stuff too. You still see a lot of carriers even structuring their emails that are just not getting read. They're too text heavy. They don't have the right creatives. They're just not digestible. There's too much stuff being jammed into an email. So it's getting blocked by, Outlook and Gmail. So all of just the tactics of what does it take to run really good comms in 2023, and then the data that actually powers all that. So acquiring broker data, constantly updating your broker data, because we all know there's tons of movement all over the place in Canada, especially in the last year. Yeah.
So you have to have, I think we should maybe focus on email for a bit, but what we're saying is that you want to be able to communicate with someone at the brokerage. Right?
Yeah.
There's going to be different people actually that a carrier might want to send a message to, right? So you can talk a bit about the different roles and stuff, but you, at a base level, you want to make sure that the email makes it into the inbox.
Yep.
And they think, oh, why wouldn't it go in the inbox? So we can talk about, obviously that there's a lot that goes into that, especially as we start thinking about the changes in spam filtering and email firewalls, and just a lot more rigor around looking at these emails, and how image heavy are they, or just a bunch of different factors. So you want to get it into the inbox, number one. And then from there, you have to have engaging enough content so that hopefully that individual, more than glances at it, hopefully doesn't just delete it, which is probably what a lot of people end up doing if there isn't something that's eye-catching. Now, all of that really leads us down a road of saying, how do you get your email to be more relevant to an individual? So, and that comes down to that kind of mantra of, well, can we get this to more of a one-to-one level of relevancy?
Right.
So,
and even before that, right? So that, yeah. And then the one step before that, which is not really a one step, it's a multi-step, but making sure that if you want to use email as a growth tool, right, beyond and a significant marketing channel, then making sure that your total audience is accurate, right? So if your total breadth is 50,000 brokers, right? Or you have, two brokers, Bob and Sally, two producers from a brokerage, and there's 10 other key people that could be selling your product, servicing your product, and you don't have their names in your database, then you're just missing opportunities, right?
Yeah. So that you're getting, down to the list, and I think, or down to the audience. And so the audience comes into play, but it's an always evolving process. And maybe we'll talk about the audience stuff a little later. So right now we're talking about, if we want to get into a brand message, and we have different goals at maybe different stages of that broker's journey, right? So I'm new to the company, I'm new to the brokerage, maybe I'm a brand new CSR, right? So there's probably, am I just getting the next email from the carrier if they even know that I'm work there, right? Am I just getting the next email from them and, oh, okay, great. Or do I get a 4 series, 5 series? Hey, by the way, we know you're new to this company, and actually you've got, kind of even new to the business. So here's a very digestible series of information about us as a carrier, right? Maybe with some click-through resources. I think we'll probably end up talking about landing pages and, how to use some facilities outside of email and your marketing automation system to support additional information that you would want to give somebody instead of jamming into these massively long text-based emails, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at the broker's journey and like what do they go through, and then you think, well, okay, how can we be a lot more relevant and a lot smarter about our brand, our kind of overall communication strategy using email? And we were on the phone with a network, a fairly large network yesterday, and they said that they're really concerned about the volume of email that their group may want to send to their brokers, because it's sort of like the easy button, right? Yeah. Oh, we have something to send out. Let's blast it to everybody.
Yeah.
And you think, well, there's really not anything wrong with getting an email from an organization a few times a week if that email is relevant to me.
Right.
But if you're just blasting the entire base because you don't know enough about them, you don't know where they're at in maybe their journey, and you're just one more piece of information that you're trying to do a catch-all, that's when you erode trust in the audience and say, well, I'm just going to delete this because 1 in 5 might be relevant to me at that moment, but these other ones like aren't relevant to me.
Right.
So talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So I think, I think, and there's so much influence that you can gain at the stage of when you start to profile your audience, right? So I think that the more data that you gather on your audience, and we have solutions to go and do that, obviously the more relevant your communications are going to be, right? So something very simple as, not really simple, but a new broker welcome, like you were saying, right? I'm new to the brokerage, or I'm new to, I've been in personal lines for 5 years, and now I'm going to try my hand at commercial, right? The carriers, and I remember being this broker back, 12, 15 years ago, the carriers that really support your education, it can be very overwhelming, right? As you're starting new, you're getting into these new lines, you're trying to do a good job, you're trying to learn all this information. And, you kind of attach yourself to, what the carriers that make things kind of simple, easy, digestible information that you can learn. Right. And I think it's also a misconception that you're getting this mentorship at these brokerages, because you're not all the time. Right. I think the bigger companies kind of have plans and what have you. So for the new broker welcome, there's such an opportunity to influence as a carrier. What is that 5 series over 90 days? What applications do I need? What is my guide to easy application so I can actually try to grow a book of business? All of those different things, right? So that's kind of one example. And then, if you have, the relevancy conversation, even something as simple as, if we know that these 5 producers are cyber specialists, then why are we including them in PI, home and auto comms, right? Something as very basic as that. And I think what's really important to understand is that, these email platforms are getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And if you don't read, if your audience isn't engaging in those comms, there's a big chance they're just landing in spam, even if it says that it's been sent. So, I also think there's another, just because you have the broker data, right, sitting in a guide wire because they've been quoting, for example, or let's say they subscribed at some other time to a newsletter, like that's just not good enough. It needs to be understanding, what do they do? What are their primary product lines, right? Is this the first time, if this is a broker that sent in 3 applications and that, we know that they're new, based on a created date in a guide wire or a CRM or some other system, then that's how we can start gaining the profile information in order to better send communications. And that's how you kind of create this readership. And I see this in our business too, right? I subscribe to HubSpot emails, actually all of their content, because I think it's some of the best content I've ever read over the last 8 years. But if I don't read it more than 3 times, 4 times, regardless if I'm subscribed, all of a sudden I see my HubSpot emails in my junk.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't really want them to be in my junk.
Or they say,
right.
Hey, good
so my point about that is that it's the strategy of, revisiting that relationship through an email strategy. Right. So relevancy, but then also revisiting. We talked a lot about that with our partners yesterday, was revisiting opt-in, getting them to set up preferences.
Yeah, I think when you start to ask, when whoever's running an email channel, right? But in this case, we're talking about carriers, and throw MGAs into that mix as like, a B2B type audience, right? Whenever you're running an email channel and you start to ask yourself the questions of like, how is this impacting our business? What is the strategic measurables that we can gain off of this email channel
Mm-hmm.
in order to better understand how people engage with our brand, and maybe even how that's impacting quote and bind and other elements within our business. The moment you start asking those questions, I think it forces the conversation around the technology and well, do we even have an email strategy? Because
Right.
we've been in, some of the biggest carriers around that are now looking at, well, and networks, and they're now saying, well, actually, we do want to ask those questions. Like, email can't just be a, very basic technology platform that we run and we're blasting out messages. We actually are starting to ask ourselves these questions. How are people engaging with this? Beyond an open and a click, very basic metrics, and they may not be, those metrics may not go beyond the marketing team because it's not viewed as strategically. So now the VPs, in this case, the COOs, and they're starting to look at, well, more broadly across the whole, the whole life cycle in our carrier business. Well, email is a pretty critical channel for us.
Exactly.
Yes, we got to get critical bulletins out. Yes, we got to we have other more traditional marketing events and things that we might do. But on the whole, we're saying, we want to understand how this is strategically impacting, what more can we do to automate and simplify and segment and become way more relevant to our end broker audience. So I think when you start to ask those questions, then that forces everyone around the table to say, well, okay, well, actually, we don't have much of an email strategy, right? We don't even have a platform that if we wanted to, and by the way, we don't have the experience,
Right.
Because all we've been doing is the bare minimum to get our things out that we need to get out. And we're not sitting back saying, hey, how does this support
Right.
claims? How does this support
New
new
business.
business? How does this support commercial? How does this support personal lines?
Yep.
What does all that look like,
Yep.
right? Where can we automate? What can we trigger?
Right. Yeah, based on action, and not just action with marketing, but based on action with the business. So something very simple, like maybe you decide to put these new brokers through, commercial, a 90-day commercial drip, right, around cyber. This is what you're going to support their journey. This is support their assisted, kind of assisted selling type model. And then being able to understand by email 3, have they sent in 2 submissions or 1 submission or any submissions, right? Being able to kind of connect the dots. And if they have, then obviously that informs your campaign. You can understand what they're doing. If they haven't, what is that? Do you alert sales? Maybe this person needs some help, whatever that looks like, right?
Yeah.
So it's really just going beyond that, batch and blast approach of, like you said, yes, okay, critical bulletins, those are a must have. You're never going to get those off the table. But another example is, we always look at our open rates, right? And if you're pushing, a 50, 60%, even 40 in some cases open rate, that's really good, right? It's in the industry that's very good, but no one ever asks themselves, oh, wait a second, but that still means that 7,000 people of our key audience aren't engaging.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So how about we actually take a step back and look at that 7,000
What's going on
versus
with
just
them?
being like patting ourselves on the back for the 46% open rate.
Yeah, what's going on with the other
Right.
Yeah, and unique opens over a period of time, and starting to flush that out to say, wow, we got a batch of people that have never been really engaging with our content.
Right.
Because we can obviously measure beyond just opens and clicks. We can measure whether or not they're making their way to these broker portals, these other ancillary web pages. If you're using landing pages, which we definitely recommend you do to distribute information beyond a logged in gated area, the stuff that you can, we could track all that. We can see, oh yeah, you know what? They made it over this landing page, which contains a bunch of additional data or information that's really specific to that particular audience. Maybe it's a large broker network partner, and hey, we have a separate landing page set up, and there's a bunch of PDFs and stuff, and there's different contact information, and that's all designed for that person. Well, that doesn't need to be behind a landing page. None of that information's critical. I mean, it's not going to be searchable. It's not going to show up you're not going to be able to find it unless you have the link. But we can track all that. We can say, oh, you know what? These people have never been there. You went through all this exercise to roll out a very specific broker network initiative and blah, 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 get it all separate. And we've got, 300 people or 1,000 people that have never gone to this stuff. They've never done anything with it. So what's going on with that?
Right.
And you could say, well, maybe it's something going on with the way we're sending email. I think what happens is as you start to be more strategic with the programs, you get less of that. People actually are engaging because you're using best practices and you're using the, but you still need to monitor where your audience is at any given time and take action against it.
Right. So this is the good use of like landing pages, right? In these systems like a HubSpot or an Acton or Salesforce products. Like this is why, you can throw up a landing page in half a day and it really becomes a surgical tool for FAQs or these things that brokers need to see that you don't need to jam inside an email. Right. There's so much emphasis on, like you said, just like getting, volume out.
Yeah.
And it's just not strategic volume.
No, it's not. And I think I wouldn't say most, but I think a lot of the larger players, even the mid play, like they've got some kind of strategy, maybe they're coming out of digital transformation, maybe they're in the middle of it. But they ultimately have some brand persona that they are trying to bring out into the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that no different than if you said, hey, you know what? Well, I've got a chain of retail stores and, out there in the marketing material, we're all about convenience and selection. And then you walk into the store and it's like, well, you don't have my size.
Yeah.
So there's a disconnect between what the brand is saying and what we're feeling. Now in this world, and a lot of this where there isn't a physical location, your touch points are all electronic. Right. So if you're sending out information over text or email, those are touch points. And so if you say, hey, we're all about reducing friction in the process, yet I'm getting 8 emails from you every 2 weeks that are very high friction. I got to log in everywhere. They're super long. They're not relevant. There's a disconnect, right? Yep. So I think one of the things that business leaders need to understand is that every one of those emails is a touch against your brand. Every one of those, if you're using SMS, again, is a touch against your brand. So you have to make sure that is strategic now, because it'll erode that really quickly. Hey, we're all about this. And meanwhile, it's like, well, that's not represented here. Yeah. Right. So I think where you can find those leaders that do want to be something in the mind of a broker and hey, we represent this out in the market. Cool. That's excellent. Now let's be strategic on our comms. Let's make sure we're running
100%.
Speed, right?
Yeah. It needs to follow up. Your broker user experience has to match what you're walking and talking out there from a brand experience.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about broker profiling. How are we doing for time? 20 minutes? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Flew by. So why don't we talk a little bit about what it means to have your audience? Because
right.
So yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about the audience?
So I think the thing is, so going back, so there's the relevant comms, personalization, to 2 big ones, right? But I always, which I think those are obvious ones when you know who you're talking to, what they do at the brokerage, that they're in their primary product lines and their roles, like those are kind of basic questions for relevant comms. But I also think it's such an exciting opportunity from a growth perspective in terms of growing the broker database. So I think it's just so, I think I work with a lot of carriers who, where do they get their lists? Well, they get their lists typically from, sometimes even Excel sheets. Sometimes they're pulling the information out of their quoting, their principal, transactional platforms. Right. So that's another way that they build their lists. But the thing is that
they meet with them. They
meet with them.
They try to collect information.
Business cards, they come back, but really, like, do they really come back and add them to the CRM? But right. So there's and then there could be CRM, and usually CRM's a bit, shaky in terms of if that data is clean or not. But constantly I look at these data reports to see that there's missing information, right? That we've got a ABC insurance brokerage. We know that there's 50 employees there and the database shows 3. So it's really kind of setting yourself up to fail, not to fail, but, you know, I think growing your list is key. Growing your list, keeping it clean is key. And then at the same time, taking the opportunity to farm accurate data, you know, every 6 months or every quarter. Right. Goose Digital's built a tool that allows you to go out with, you know, a very, you know, cohesive process, secure process to go and keep that data fresh. So then your comm strategy is followed by something that's relevant, right? So
yeah. So if you have this is really key for B2B type marketing, because you'll have situations where more than one person in that target organization is worthy of receiving messages. Maybe not all the same message, right? In some cases, yes, but going back to the role conversation. So even when we do our own marketing, you know, we might look at, hey, we would like the CEO or president. We would like the VP and director of marketing. Maybe there's marketing managers or coordinators or underneath, and we'll have a little segmentation set up so that we're sending messages to the relevant groups, right?
Right.
But right there, you've got potentially 3, 4, 5 people within a company that we want to communicate with, or we'd love to communicate with. So how do you manage that over time when people are changing jobs,
roles
in the company, leaving the company, etc., right? So you know, traditional opt-in campaigns are not really built for that. And traditional subscription management centers give you a little bit of that control to say, hey, I'd like more so information about this versus that. But ultimately, when you have such a strong client customer kind of relationship like we've got with like a carrier and a broker, there's an opportunity to make that, like, develop that more, right? So, hey, actually, like, if you tell us a few more things about yourself, Jen, you know, we'll make, you know, we plan on giving you tips and advice, right? And it's just a basic thing in an email that might be just personalized messaging that pops into everybody's email, but now you're getting a personalized tip for you, and it's keyed off of the fact that we know that, you know, you predominantly are doing this type of role within the organization. On top of that, you need to be able to say, well, oh, Sally, Bob, John, they're no longer here. But these 3 people replace them. Right. So to be able to quickly swap in and out people that should be on the list. Right. So yeah, we have created something that allows us to do that. But it seems to be a challenge. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this. It's just, you know, you need to have an audience to work with. And then on top of that, we've got so many acquisitions going on in this industry, right, where we don't know who's where, how, you know, I'm sure their emails still work on their previous organization, but who's going to these groups to say, hey, great, you know what, we're a carrier, name a carrier. Hey, we'd like to work to make sure we have the right people in our database. And by the way, we have all these people right now. Can somebody please, yes or no, you know, oh, we need these new people. Yeah. We just don't see a lot of that. And everybody that we've talked to about it, it's like, yeah, that's a huge concern.
Yeah, it's a huge concern, because then how can you move past some, you know, using email, you know, as kind of like, how can you innovate with email if you don't have the right audience, right? Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, and then how do you get that information, right? Who's going to take the time at the brokerage? Is it the controller, general manager? Make sure that kind of part of onboarding. Well, it should be part of onboarding, right? To go and make, you know, so but there's now a way to automate that. There's a way to use technology to go and get that.
Yeah, you're not doing an Excel list. You're not calling them up and then you're double typing into a CRM.
You're not sending it to the broker principal, who is probably just going to forward it on to the controller or delete it, right? Yeah. So but then it's about really creating what is that value add and making it known to the broker why you're doing this, why you're actually making an effort to get accurate broker data, right? So yes, there's the opportunity, but it's also, I really believe the education is such a huge piece. Education, as we all know, is lacking in this industry a lot, right? And, a brokerage of the size of 100 people, it's very hard to support that education and training, right?
Mhm.
So you lean on your carriers to do that, right? So, yeah. So I just think there's, once you make I think the step one is making sure you have the right audience and actively working every single year to keep that audience fresh.
Yep.
That's giving you the best chance of success. And then all of your strategic campaigns can be built underneath that, right? And then your segmentation in these platforms becomes unbelievably powerful, right?
Mhm.
And when I say segment by broker, individual, but producer versus CSR versus the marketer that's sending in all the submissions versus the keyer, the data entry person who will probably graduate to get their license. That's the individual. But then there's the segmentation power on the brokerage, right?
Mhm.
Segmenting your top 10, your top 10%.
Yeah.
Who are our growth brokers? Who do we want to push growth campaigns to? Who do we not want to push growth campaigns to? Right. And again, even allowing you to do things that are hyper strategic, like co-branding. So if you want to talk about your growth brokers, right, we want to go out with cyber with these set of brokers, right? They know the key appetite that we want to write. It's profitable business.
There's different underwriters involved.
Exactly. It's a whole thing, right? So now you're wrapping around a super beautiful, tight content strategy with top 5, with specific brokers.
And then again, I think even part of that becomes even more meaningful from a measurement perspective, because if you're measuring the impact of a broker that you have, outdated contacts and maybe not all that you would like to see out of those contacts, measuring the impact of your overall strategy, it becomes, so I think, everyone wants to do measurement. I think when you talked about that, yeah, we should be doing measurement. Great. Even more so now we're talking about, hey, we've got a strategic partner, we've got a strategic network, we want to grow with them, or a strategic bigger broker, and they're on our list, and we've got these customized resources now for them.
Yep.
And well, we want to measure what is the engagement in that base.
Yeah.
We've got we got 80% engagement over a rolling 90 on that particular base, and we know that we've got a decent penetration on the number of people that we should have on our database, and rounded out the attributes. I mean, now you've got something that you can go to the team to say, we feel very comfortable that our communication strategy to that company, to that brokerage, we think it's happening. We think it's working, right? Yeah. And by the way, we have a baseline now, so we can say, yeah, we know we drive a certain amount of this and that, and you can see the gross written premium that's coming from that.
Yeah.
And we can see what the communication metrics look like. So from there going forward, it's like, now we can benchmark this. How are we doing this year? How are we doing next quarter?
And I think that now, I know this podcast is about email, but I think now that, so you get that put in place, right? Very surgical approach. And then when you want to branch into social media, retargeting, paid ads, now when you're talking about asking carriers, to co-fund, and there's these co-marketing dollars, now it starts to open up a whole other, transparency around co-marketing dollars and using it smart in a way, right? Now you have all this visibility in terms of, we're going to go and remarket to, or we're going to remarket to the end customer, or we're going to do, a paid media campaign that's, to the end customer, but driving to a broker. Like now it all becomes a cohesive process and not fragmented, right? So
yeah, throwing money off to the side.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty good. Anything else you want to add on the email strategies for carriers? I would say like, big networks is a different one. I think I'd probably do that a different podcast, because it creates a little bit of internal comms, can still be super, almost like broker marketing in a way, even if you're like some of these bigs that have a lot of brokers that work for them. I think it's a totally different, I think using marketing automation and using the platforms to do a lot of that stuff that we're doing, applies to them. How are you going to manage if you're a network and you've got, 13 brands, some of which that you want to maintain and co-brand, and now you've got to run some kind of internal comms around that group.
Yeah,
I think that's a whole strategy to make sure that as you're acquiring and as you're growing, that it just is a whole nother level than saying, hey, we're a 150 person brokerage, and we would send emails to our internal people. Now we've got 1,000 people. Now we've got 1,500 people. Now we've got 2,000 people. And by the way, they're a little bit fragmented in terms of how we still maintain some of those brands on the front line. Well, how are we doing that?
Yeah.
And by the way, what are they doing? Because now you've got crossover between end audience. So within the network, you've got a challenge, and you need the right type of tooling and the right type of strategy and the right type of measurement. But then your end insured marketing becomes a whole nother can of worms, because you've got crossover and you've got a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah, I think that's another podcast. But do you have any?
I just think that, like, I think my only other thing is that there's so many that we talk to that are already late to the gate, and then some are not, right? So they're
most of them are. I think most of them are not leveraging the tools and strategies.
Like,
I think it's also because, so not to cut you off, you can get into it too. I think it's also because some of them have just been sitting on older tech, right? But some of them have been going through like these acquisitions, and it's difficult to say, hey, we're going to like launch a bigger communication strategy when we don't have all of those ducks in a row, right?
So you're already late to the gate, right? And then email's only gotten harder, right? So in some ways, I think that it needs to be emphasized in 2023. It's a huge growth channel. It's a huge, with the right technology, it's still the strongest tool. It's still the strongest channel. So, I think that it's just time to look at comms strategically in a better way in going into next year.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. That's pretty good. Can't think of anything else that, all of this you can do without a CRM, by the way. If you're sitting there thinking we don't have a CRM.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Like, there's so much advancements you can do without perfect data, but you kind of got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Let's wrap it up then. Thank you. Okay. This is good.